EMDR is. It's like retraining your brain to go different pathways and not to keep using the old like self-talk and whatever, like the old stuff that's not working. Because they used to believe we couldn't. It didn't matter what we would do. What we have is going to be for life. It's like chronic.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are live on the internet. I have to tell Jeff we're live. He wanted me to tell him. Hello, internet. The World Wide Web.
Yo.
June of 2021. We're streaming, and technology is a little confusing, so this is an experiment. And this is another episode of New World Chaos, and I'm Nemo. Jeff is taking a break today. But he's hanging out in the back porch if anyone else wants to join him there with John. And these are my friends. This is Danielle and Dylan.
Yo, I've been a nurse for 1 year. I'm celebrating that. Exactly 1 year. So it's a special anniversary day for me. It is also the 7-year anniversary for... Actually, no, it's a 6-year anniversary from when same-sex marriage got legalized. So I call this the International Day of Gay Nurses. Because why the hell not?
Yeah, International Day of Gay Nurses. Who's
yeah!
I'm just letting Jeff know that we're live now. Too much multitasking, guys.
Mm-hmm.
But, man, I really wanted to make sure we got to going live fairly quickly here, because this has been spontaneous, you two coming together and already having an awesome conversation, and I don't want to miss it. So, we've been talking about trauma, and Danielle has been following Gabor Mate's work. Is that how I said it? Gabor Mate gets a latte.
Mm-hmm. And he might be a hate. I don't know. I have to see his OnlyFans.
Oh, God. That's traumatic. It's so refreshing to hear people talk about trauma and empathize with the fact that sometimes people have reactions that has more to do with what they're experiencing internally, and they're not trying to hurt somebody else with it. They're just having a reaction. But I have a hunch that there's just so many people in this world that they're default primed to interpret every reaction as something intentionally pushed towards them.
Yeah, like I said, like the number one conflict style found among people is avoidance. And that might be including pushing it down, trying to numb it with some sort of substance, or just, I don't know, just running away from it. But as I've said, the key to taking out trauma is recognizing it and just sitting with the ugliness. I mean, yeah, it feels weird. I mean, people are just kind of scared of what they don't know or can't grasp. So they take it in and they get to kind of know it. Like, we don't eliminate the trauma. We just simply learn to be at peace with it and work with it.
Yeah.
Eliminating your inner demons isn't ultimately the goal. Like, it's actually making peace with them. Like, we can't get rid of the fact that that stuff has happened in the past. We can only find ways to take it on.
Yeah. So when I was watching the Wisdom of Trauma series, there were actually about 25 speakers who were interviewed by Gabor Mate last week. And when the movie came out, that Science and Non-Duality, I think, is the organization that actually put together the movie, the documentary about the wisdom of trauma. And a lot of the people that watched the movie, I think there's millions of people who've watched the movie now, who've experienced trauma themselves, have acknowledged this, but they've also said how difficult it is. And something that comes up is a lot of talking about addictions, because what Gabor Mate experienced as working with people in Vancouver, BC, is that people, when they have to start feeling those feelings about things that happen in their past or in their childhood, they're so intense and so overwhelming, the only thing they can do is self-medicate it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the origins of the addiction. Mm-hmm. And then, but he also says to these people, like, bravo for choosing that over dying, over suicide, because those feelings are so intense. If you hadn't self-medicated, you wouldn't be here right now. So stop beating yourself up about that. Now you are here, and now you can find people to help you work through those things. So you need to go through those intense feelings in a safe place with safe people where you feel safe. And I'm not saying you made it sound easy. You kind of tried to, it sounded like you made it sound easy, but for some people who don't have a safe place to work through those things, that's why they're on the streets, that's why they're homeless, that's why they're in trapped in all these different addictions is because they don't have a safe place to deal with those. But they're still
Absolutely.
here, and he says, "Bravo for you found a way to cope," and whether it's alcohol or any sort of even caffeine, whatever you. I mean, I think someone at the on the series said Starbucks is a trauma people drop in. It's a drop in place for trauma. I mean, serious, because that's another way to self-medicate when you just can't go over the edge.
It's interesting as a metaphor too, because as a youth outreach worker and so much of my work over the years being mobile, I really, especially some of the research, focusing on the third space, which we talked about in the podcast before. The coffee shop is like the quintessential third space, where people share it publicly and they cross paths, and not everybody necessarily knows each other, but there's this sense of it being a welcoming and open place. And if it's a really well-designed third space and has that magic spark, then it tends to be a magnet that really draws people in. And in the best cases, if I'm bringing it into like what Daniel's saying, can even be like a place for people to start that healing process.
Yeah, kind of like what you were mentioning as the agora, or like just basically the conditions are met. Just get a bunch of bees into the beehive and they'll start interacting with each other.
Yeah, bees in the beehive. Well, bees are really organized.
Yeah, and they're very social creatures. Like, they can't, of course, like, we know they can't speak, so, like, they actually dance to communicate with each other, which I found is adorable.
Yeah, maybe we should try that out. Let's experiment and try dancing to communicate with people.
I have heartburn.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a slight headache from all this light.
Okay, so if you keep doing this, you're going to turn into the Pepto-Bismol commercial.
Yeah.
And if I tried that experiment in real life, I wonder if people would just think I'm doing some, like, weird chicken mating dance. Because, like, the only time I think of communication through dancing with species is mating dances.
I mean, we do kind of communicate through, like, dances. We just use body language.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
if
true.
something's hurting, like, we just kind of put our hand on it, or we just use gestures.
Well, I suppose dancing is not necessarily about literal communication. It's more of just
Artistic stuff.
being expressive and artistic, and also maybe trying to woo somebody on the dance floor.
Well, I most recently actually worked through something traumatic in my life by working through it.
Yeah, with
Doing
your
a
dance.
dance. I don't know, maybe you want to tell them what I did?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. I helped her.
I'm not a dancer either, so it was
Yeah, I helped you film it, and you explained a lot of it to me. There's so many layers to it. Danielle is one of the people that I've met in my life that has the most radical and just dramatic life experiences all across the board. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, because I imagine a lot of people assume that others' lives are like theirs. But the dance that you did was incredibly powerful, about one of the particular events where you basically lost your kids. And you incorporated Tai Chi into it that you're really passionate about, and there's just so much meaning to it. And I helped you film it, and I still have that on my camera. Maybe I should actually edit that so we can share it with the world, and I shouldn't put it off anymore.
Yeah, well, when I was preparing for that dance, I attend a group kind of place where people dance called Dance Church, where people just get together, like hundreds of people, and just dance.
Yeah.
Not together necessarily, just dance whatever you feel. And I was starting to see these movements happen, like, because it involved being brutalized by the police. There was this movement that kept coming up where I was handcuffed, and like these movements, I was trying to get away, and it just was coming out of my experience without consciously thinking about it. And it was from those moves that I decided I need to work through this trauma. My body's already doing it. I just need to write the script around the dance and then pantomime the story. And so it was a mix of pantomiming actually what happened for real, and also adding a little bit of dance and some Tai Chi. And it was a way of like working through my trauma, like even in front of you when you were filming. New things were coming out as I was like reliving this sort of event. So dance is extremely helpful, I think, for working through trauma. I yeah, it was a new experience for me, but I highly recommend it.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that's the reason why I exercise so much. Is like I just like to keep running because it just spouts out that extra energy that I have.
Yeah.
Dylan's a running fiend. Honestly, when I go running with you, I don't really run that often, but I do bike a lot, and I definitely physical practices and exercise has been the essential foundation of healing and just feeling way better physically. And when I go running with you, your light jog is a sprint for me. I don't even know how you run that fast and make it look like you're not running that fast.
Practice?
You're a maniac.
Yes.
I'm not a fast person either. I'm a slow person. And even your walking speed is like a light jog for me.
I mean, it could be because I'm living up to the stereotype that gay men walk quickly. I don't know, like, I mean, my transit is naturally faster because I'm into dudes. I don't know.
The early bird gets the worm?
Yeah. Or the gay bird gets it a little faster.
Well, yeah. I don't know. The dudes of bird species are usually the colorful ones.
Yes. They call me gay.
Yeah, wow,
What other things were we talking about?
I don't even know.
Oh,
It's just...
genetic. We were talking about. Okay, so can I just bring this up real quick because I don't
Yes.
get to talk about this a lot. So something that Gabor completely turns around from 20 years ago, what we believed about mental illness. 20 years ago, we believed that mental illness was completely a genetic chronic illness. So if you had this gene and it was triggered, then you would have this mental health condition for the rest of your life. And the only option you had was to medicate it, which is what we were talking about. So we were also talking about how we suppress our bodily reactions to things. And the medical and psychiatric society, part of our society, decided, well, we can do this with drugs, and that's how we suppress anything that our body is trying to work through. So if you see mental health condition as you trying to work through something that happened in your past as a trauma, and it's doing that to heal itself, which is what Gabor was talking about, your body is actually, not even Gabor, this other man, Stanislav Grof, was talking about how there's a point in your life where if you've been suppressing something that happened in your past and you haven't dealt with it, your body is going to automatically get to a place where it needs to work through it. It's going to heal itself by going through this process. And if you block that, it's not going to be able to get through that process, right?
Yes.
So I have an experience where I think he talks about holotropic states, and a holotropic state is basically if you think of a shaman, when a shaman goes into a trance, or you think of even a Buddhist monk, and they go into a meditative state where they don't have to eat or drink for, I don't know, sometimes months, right? So they're going into this state. From the Western point of view, from the psychiatric point of view, these people, it's pathological. I mean, if you see someone doing that, you need to bring them to the nearest psychiatric ward, and you need to start giving them antipsychotic drugs because they're going through this process. If we don't stop it, it's But what he's saying is that you're at a point in your life, if your body is going through this process, it is ready for that. Like you might have this many traumas, and there's some that are so deep, your body's not going to pick that one up from the bottom and make you go through it. It's going to go through its own process. It's going to go through one at a time when your body and your mind feel like they're ready to deal with this.
Yeah, ready to take on the ugliness, as I call it.
Yeah, and it's not always going to be the deepest, horrible, most deep, dark secret that you've had, been hiding your whole life. It can be a tiny little thing, but it's going to work its way down. And people, when they start getting into that feeling, then they're afraid of it. You were talking about avoidance, and they're like, they're going to do anything to cover it up. And that's where the alcohol comes. I start feeling it, I'm going to start drinking. I need some alcohol. Or I'm going to start feeling this. I need to, take this drug or that drug. And then they're constantly in this way of suppressing it. And then what what Stanislav Grof says is that that's not a necessarily good thing. But like I said, if you're not in a safe place, that's why we've invented psychiatry, and we've invented places in the hospital where people can go, because if they're not in a safe place and they're going through this really intense state, like a psychotic break, for example, and they don't have someone around so that they can feel and be safe in that process. And that's why they were talking about people with using psychedelics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you, like the people from MAPS, they're going into the VA now in Portland, and they're working with the people with PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
and veterans with PTSD, and they're getting them, at least if it's one-on-one, it's even better, but they get like 3 people or 4 veterans, and then 3 guides, I guess they could say, to help them take what I can't remember what
Ayahuasca.
It's not that one.
DMT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
5-EOM DMA or whatever.
DMA. Yeah, the
MDMA.
lowest MDMA. So
Yeah.
they're using MDMA, and they're just allowing. But they're in a safe place. They're making sure that they're guided, that they're not by themselves, so that they can work through these processes. And I think that's brilliant, because
Oh yeah.
then they don't have to, cope with alcohol or the other drugs. Actually, I count the drugs that the psychiatrists are giving them as
psychoactive.
Yeah, they're just doing the same thing as if they went and they did cocaine or opioid or whatever they're using. To me, it's the same. All it's doing in the end. I'm not saying they don't need them. I'm not advocating that.
Yes.
There's a certain point where they might need them, but I think it's doing the same thing. It's just covering it up, and until these people can actually work through, because their body's ready to deal with this
It's coping.
trauma.
Yes. Like, medications are meant to be used in tandem with therapy and, like, getting to a place like that. Like, all medications are there to do is just to make the chemicals in your brain work better. And in extreme cases, if you're at a really high point where you're just feeling like you absolutely have no control, it's to get you to more of like a steady point. But it's not meant to be used to like try to control people. It should be used only in absolute emergencies. It's not meant to be avoidant of the job. Like, I'm a nurse, I'm very passionate about it, and that kind of stuff, I almost never will use a tranquilizing medication unless if a patient specifically asks for it. Instead, I try to get to the bottom of what's like going on, because I mean, you could take out the leaves from a weed, but it's still going to grow back. You have to look at the root and figure out what's going on from there. So if they're at a really high state, help them to come back to like a more grounded state so we can figure out what's going on. But if they're acting up for something, it's because something's going on, or they're trying to tell us something. They could be yelling, screaming, they could be calling us all sorts of different things, they could be blaming all sorts of kind of issues. It's like the majority, minority, whatever it is. But in the sense, they're just overwhelmed. It could be defense mechanism. But you got it. It's like, I just try to show them that I'm here to be with you. Do what you need to. If you need a little bit of time to yourself, that's fine. But if you need me to guide you through it, I'll help you with that. And then we can talk more when you're at a more grounded level. We can go from there. And you can help me to give some more insight to like what you're going through.
I'm glad that you have the independence at your jobs to be able to do that, because as both of you know, most of my experiences in the traditional medical system have just been atrocious. And so just like getting some of this context from Danielle's perspective, just it reconfirms a lot of what I knew, but adds more to it, more to the story and the history of it. And then when you talk about the way that you describe holotropic experiences, that's a word that I've maybe heard once or twice. I didn't really know what it meant. And it occurs to me that's another way of describing what I've experienced like multiple times. And the first time I really experienced it was at the end of 2016, and that led to what I call disillusion.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think, if I want to label it something that is recognizable to other people, I think the closest I could label it is ego death.
Mm-hmm.
And I've experienced that multiple times. And also just general, the more that I continue on in this path, the more my experiences are essentially just like egoless and very present.
Mm-hmm.
And what it means, it's just literally like touching on the foundation of reality. So being able to experience reality as it is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost feels like waking up from a dream. Or say you're in a dream and then you start to wake up, you feel that process, and all of a sudden you've touched basic reality.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to be in that state. Most of what people suffer and what tortures them is internal, and it's trauma, or it's in their mind, and it's almost like they're lost in a labyrinth of their mind. And when you first begin to experience that foundation of being, usually it's still partially obscured by those things that are really antagonizing you, and they feel so much more intense because you're getting so close to feeling more alive, more real, and it just feels, for some people, it feels like torture. It's like essentially waking up and healing is
Diving
painful.
into that ugliness.
Yeah, it's painful. It's no matter what, inevitably it's painful, because if you're asleep or numb, then you're not feeling the pain that you cause yourself. And so it's survivalistic. And so inevitably, when you start to feel it, it's going to be painful.
But it is your body healing itself. And I think that's where the destigmatization comes in, because I think if certain people who've been punished, and I can speak from my own feelings of being hospitalized, I took it as a punishment. I felt it as a punishment, and I was not allowed to choose what chemicals they put in my body.
Yeah.
So, and when I chose not to use those chemicals, I was threatened to be put in a state hospital for life at the age of 17, and actually had to go through a trial to prove that, I was a straight A student. I was very active in school. I was just generally, I wasn't a troublemaker, and so it could have gone 50-50. I might have been hospitalized for life just because I chose not to. So what I'm saying is, I know things might change now about that, but I just want to say one thing about what you said about the state that you went through, that state of mind that you went through. I think there have been people all throughout time have gone into those, like mystics and other people. I mean, I think almost probably everybody has probably felt that at some time in their life. But if they've denied it right away because, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy. Oh my gosh,
they might not have
people are going to think I'm crazy if I tell them I just felt like this weird thing happened where I was had an out of body experience. I'm not going to tell anyone, because then they're going to throw me in a hospital and punish me. That's how I felt, and I think I'm not the only one that's had negative experiences in a hospital that made me never want to go to that place again. It'll never be a safe place for me. So I'm just talking from my experience. For some other people, it really helped them greatly and saved their lives. So I'm not trying to generalize to the general population.
Yeah, it's your experience. One of the things I really wanted to add is, one of the things that really bother me is when a patient is not taken seriously or when they're not heard. I've had it happen before, and it just started to build a continuous rage, where a patient clearly needs something, or they need somebody with them, and they're just ignored, or they're told it's no, you're fine, or you need to stop, you're fine. It's happened to me before when I was doing clinicals in a hospital, that's basically residency but for nurses, where one patient was disconnected from reality, and he was concerned about all the fire exits, and he was saying they're going to set the hospital on fire. I don't know what to do. And the nurse that was working with him just said hey, it's okay, no, it's fine. You need to stop what you're doing. Come on, man, just continue onward. And I just looked at that man are you serious? He just walked away. So I just told the patient, I'm going to try something different. Tell me what kind of questions you had, and I listened to him. And it helped to calm him down and get to a more steady level. And I asked him some other questions, just some fun stuff, and helped him to get to a more steady level. He was calmer from that.
Because you were actually open to listening to him.
Yeah.
A lot of people that are resistant, it just inflames distrust and a sense of helplessness, especially if a person doesn't have a way to, if he can't leave his room and go check for himself, or if he feels trapped there. I've worked with a lot of people that struggle with those issues in long-term homeless and housing programs, and honestly, I've even dealt with situations, as both you two already know, where staff have those issues even. And I think what you just did there is, I would say, very similar to what's called reality testing. And this is it's a practice that's really helpful with people that deal with schizophrenia, and if they're using meth. Those are the two instances where I've used it the most. And it's really, you just help the person, or they can do it for themselves if they have an understanding of it. You help them pay attention to what they experience and actually experiment. And really, it's very simple. They experiment with, if I do this, what happens? So they're paying attention to themselves and the world around them. It's this interaction between themselves and the world. So it's if I take this ball and I let go of it, what happens to it? Well, it falls to the ground.
Right.
And so they're through their five senses and this like experience of here and now and focus on that rather than thinking helps their body actually get that communication, because their body's trying to feel reality through the five senses.
Yes, and like I had another patient in clinicals where I heard a patient saying that, help, I need somebody, and she was just eating her meal, but I had an instinctive sense that something was wrong or something was going on. She seemed scared. She said, what's going on with my food? Or could you help me with like rearranging it? And I said, okay. So I just moved things like maybe like a half inch around a bit. And I said, okay, I hope this helps her now. She's like, oh, thank you. I just kind of listened to her, and it turned out to be like I got a PCA and I told like the personal care assistant, like, hey, this patient really needs you. And the PCA just asked me, like, what's wrong? And I said, she really needs to be fed, and I think something else is going on. The PCA just looked and laughed at me and just said, like, okay, I'll just check it out. Turns out to be, I looked at that patient, and turns out to be that she had schizophrenia. So she was probably in a state of mind, she was probably, like, in those states of mind where it was really frightening to her. Thus, that's why I had that instinct go off that something was wrong. This isn't just a patient who wanted to eat. This is like something was going on. I didn't know anything about this patient before I entered her room, but I just wanted to be there for her.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're one of the medical professionals that really recognizes patients as full human beings where they have the potential to be, say, knowledgeable or wise or skillful, or they may be saying something that's serious. It is really strange to me how many medical professionals have this almost like a culture or a personality type where they dismiss people. It's like, and I think that's certainly not exclusive to the medical field, but certain people, when they go through experiences where they build a skill or knowledge or get, advance in life and improve themselves or become a specialist, it's like this kind of arrogance and this simplicity, like they just can't imagine that even though they're now skillful and knowledgeable, that doesn't mean that everyone else is dumber than them.
Right. Or that, like, oh, they're just overreacting or something like that. I hate it when people just say that stuff or just completely dismiss the patient. Like, another similar instance was when I was helping to take care of a patient who wasn't mine, but was with somebody else. And I asked the patient, hey, how you doing? Let's call her Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how you doing, Jane? And she told me, I feel very depressed. And I told her, thanks for telling me. If I can do anything, I'm willing to be there for you and listen for you.
Mm-hmm.
She said, thank you. And then I told her nurse, saying, hey, just want to let you know, Jane was feeling really depressed, and he just laughed at me and said, like, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, just be there for her, listen to her. He just walked away. Later on that night, we were putting her to bed, and we were just doing the cares for her and everything. And this guy, the other guy who, like the nurse that was taking care of her for the night, I had a different patient, had a Bluetooth headset in his ear, and he was answering calls and just blabbering on to whoever was at the other end. He was about to answer another call, and I just said, let's focus on Jane for now. And this guy starts yelling at me, saying, like, I can't tell him what to do, that I should only be the one who's learning here, I can't teach him. And eventually he tried to tell me to get out, and I said, like, I'm not going anywhere until the work is done. He keeps on yelling at me, and then eventually the patient says, I agree with Dylan. It bothers me when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually he became silent and wanted me to get out some more, and I just said, I'm going to stay here with her. I'm going to stay here with you until the job's done. So a few more minutes pass, about an hour or so passes, and Jane calls me to go into her room, and she told me, could you please mention this to the office? This is really bothering me. And I said, absolutely I will. Do I have permission to use what you've said as like testimony, evidence, whatever you want to call it? She said, absolutely you can. So I brought it up to the main office, and the office said, we're going to look at it immediately, figure this out. Dylan, you're 100% in the right on this. It's important to advocate for your patients, and you did it. So I called the office, got that done, and I stopped by the place again. I forgot my phone charger, and I said, I'm just going to check on the patients. because I was also ordered to tell the patient what was going on. So I went over there and I told Jane, she was in bed, that I told the office about what was going on and that her concerns were taken seriously, and she kept on thanking me. I said, hey, it's the least I can do. It's part of my job as a nurse to advocate with my patients and make sure that they're heard. I mean, they're people too, and they deserve to be heard. Like, this is all they get to know, all they get to see from us, and it's just unfair to cheat them of that.
Yeah.
I know it's been kind of going on, but Danielle was also mentioning something similar when she was with the kids that she would sometimes substitute for. Actually, I'll just let her tell you.
Yeah, it was making me think of that. We actually learned this as children because teachers, in general, I teach a very specific kind of philosophy, which is Montessori, which is a little bit different in terms of discipline than traditional discipline in preschools and school in general. However, even in Montessori, I meet teachers who have their go-to is to ignore a child who is crying. If they've decided that child seems to cry a lot for attention, as soon as they've decided that the child is doing it for attention, if the child starts crying, they will immediately ignore them, because that's supposed to help them self-soothe, calm themselves. Who knows? But it usually doesn't work. Yeah. And it infuriates me because we're ignoring a child who's crying out for help. I don't care if they do it all the time, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. If they're doing it, then there's a reason for it. Absolutely. And we're not going to get at the reason with a 3-year-old while they're having their tantrum, because they're not online. Their prefrontal cortex is not functioning. They're working from back here. And so all we can do is to calm them down. And that's enough, because that's acknowledging. What I started doing in my classroom when I noticed that some of the adults were doing this is I would say to the children, if you see a friend crying, you can bring them a Kleenex, because that's what we would do with an adult, right? Mm-hmm. You're sitting in a room of adults and you see someone crying, you're not going to go and ask them what's wrong if they're a stranger, but you might hand them a Kleenex. And so I'm like, okay, this is the good universal. If you see your friend crying, just hand them a Kleenex, and they will go and hand the child a Kleenex. And you know what? Usually that's all it takes, because the child has been acknowledged that they're having an emotion, and the child doesn't have to go over and say, what's wrong? You want to tell me what this is about? No, just acknowledging that I see that you are crying. I see that you are distressed. I'm going to hand you a Kleenex. And it's all it took. Absolutely. Because that's what these people in the hospital need, is they need to be acknowledged that they're having feelings. And we might not get to the bottom of them, because in the hospitals, at least, I was never given an EMDR class on working on my trauma. It was just like medicate them, keep them coping for as long as you can, and probably some of them end up as lifers, what a friend of mine calls lifers, that they end up in the state hospital, and that's where they are for life. Yeah. But it is true. We train children that way, is if you're going to act out, you're going to be put in the corner and let alone, ignored until you're done with your outburst, and then. So we teach children, even parents teach their children, go in the corner, I don't want to hear you screaming, take it to your room. And then when they're teenagers, we expect them to come and ask, we're having something, and we expect our parents to, gonna listen to us. They didn't listen to us when we were 5. Why would we go now and talk to them about something that's distressing us? Exactly. And then we wonder why teenagers don't want to talk to their parents, and they're suicidal, and they're all these things, and their parents don't even know, because we've been training them to do that since they were 5.
Absolutely. It's like these kids are just trying to handle these intense and complex emotions. Like, that's the first time they really had to grasp these things. I mean, the brain is constantly developing, but especially at that stage, they have these intense emotions that they have to handle. Like, it's huge to them. Like, they're not used to taking on this type of emotional load. Like, it's like saying, like, it feels like my head is on fire, you need to help me. And, like, the parents are like, yeah, just do whatever. And it's like, the kid doesn't know how to put the flame out in their head. Like, that's just like telling a kid that's saying, like, I don't know how to handle this, help. Like, my brain is going a million different directions. It's just like saying to them, like, go fuck yourself. Like, doesn't do anything.
Well, had the parent taught the child when they were 5 how to do that, then by the time they're 13, 14, 15, they would know. But they're not. The parents send them to their room when they're having emotions that the parent doesn't want to deal with, right?
Exactly. Like, people don't want to deal with that.
So how are they going to learn?
Yeah. People don't want to have to deal with the ugliness or, like, the intensity, like the duality of human. Like, some of it's good, some of it is difficult to handled. Like, that's just a part of having a kid. Like, if you're gonna have a kid, understand you're gonna have to handle that.
Yeah.
And you went through that too. Acknowledge them. They are tiny human beings, but they're becoming more and more complex by the day. At least be there with them. You can offer your presence.
Yeah.
Even, like, one of the best skills to learn is listening or just being there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to mention something before we get going on a train here too far away from it. Jeff commented earlier, he says, Saterpunk, that's his username. Nietzsche calls it the pathos of distance or the gap. I think he was referencing when I was describing how some professionals distance themselves and put others down. So I guess pathos of distance? He just said something else. Everyone let the baby cry growing up. It's probably culture, but there's an emotional process that's being aborted if the baby isn't allowed to have his full range and intensity of emotion.
Yeah, they talk about that, the Wisdom of Trauma series too, that the Lakota, it's the Dakota or the Lakota, the mothers always, if a child is crying, they're not taught to leave the child cry in their crib. They always acknowledge, and they're always keeping the child and the baby close to them. If the child's crying, it's immediate. I'm there. I'm holding the child. In fact, mostly they carry the child all the time, but they would never let a child, because there was a whole generation of parents and mothers that were taught to leave your child cry, otherwise they're gonna want at night, like in their crib, let them cry. They'll cry it out. Otherwise, they're gonna always need you. They're gonna always need you to be there. But it's the total opposite. A child's crying because they need you to be there.
Right.
So be there.
I mean, that's their only form of communicating to you. Like, you're just gonna just blow them off. It's like, you can't read their mind. They can't express to you something. That's their way of saying, like, I just want you there with me. I mean, you blame them. That's how babies are. I mean, the other thing too is, I read this on a post on Tumblr. Yeah, Tumblr, I'm a part of that hell site. Judge me all you want. So, I actually read this post that said, I think we need to replace attention-seeking, the phrase, to support-seeking. I mean, yes, it makes a lot of people seem like they're assholes by ignoring these people, but it's the truth. I mean, these people are acting out for a reason. They don't just act out for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
Unless if they're acting. But the
use of attention-seeking is also really strange. When I was a kid, most of the time that phrase was used to criticize something I was doing by adults. I actually wanted them to leave me alone. I did not want attention. And so they would make some complaint because I was angry and independent or rebellious or, insert whatever. And they would say, you're just attention-seeking. I'm like, please leave me alone. Like, I'm like, if you think I'm attention-seeking right now, you are making my life a living hell by constantly trying to kick me around and complain and say I'm stupid and arrogant and kids are terrible. So just leave me alone if you hate kids so much. And that's what I grew up with. And I think the three of us actually are on the same page relative, which is actually pretty uncommon for me.
And I give my parents a lot of credit. I mean, I grew up in a single-parent home, and my mom grew up in a culture of, like a family of 7 children. She didn't get a lot of attention herself, but it was a farming community, and my grandpa was a farmer, and so he complained a lot because he was always complaining the weather isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, because if it weren't, they didn't have food to eat. And plus, he was a farmer, and that's how they made their living. So he complained a lot. So we were not allowed to complain to grow up when we were growing up. Anything that was negative that came out of her mouth hurt my mom's trauma, her growing up thing where she couldn't handle hearing complaining. So it had nothing to do with me. But I wasn't usually complaining. I could say anything. I could say, it's raining today, which is a statement. It's a statement of fact. And she would say, I was complaining, or assume I was like complaining because I couldn't do this. And I'd be like, Mom, I'm just telling you a fact. Plus, I have a very critical mind, and so I was constantly critiquing things, which sounds like a complaint when you're critiquing something because you're tearing it apart, which is, I'm really good at that. That's why I went into film theory, because I can tear a film apart, and then put it back together because I like to do that. That's how I understand how the film works, right? And so there's a situation and I'm tearing it apart, which sounds like I'm complaining about it, but I'm critiquing it to understand it better.
Yeah.
But in her mind, saying it's raining today was a complaint, and what do you have to complain about, or like whatever I could say. And that's why I find a lot when I say a statement of fact, people are constantly jumping on me as if I actually had an opinion, and it's just a fact, and they're taking it as opinion because they're taking all these assumptions around it that it's, I'm just, and plus when I talk like this, I sound angry, but I'm actually just passionate. And once people know that about me, I'm not angry. I'm never angry, hardly ever angry. There's things I'm angry about, but I'm not going to be yelling at people. It's not their fault. The things that I'm angry about, anyone in this room or anyone I know cannot solve them, right? So, but I do sound passionate, which sounds like anger. And I think my mother felt that like passion and interpreted it as anger, interpreted it as complaining. And, go to your room if you're going to complain. And I could never critique anything, which is what I was good at. And I was trying to understand the world, and I was trying to put things together, and it was constantly shut down. Constantly.
You were just trying to grasp it, and it's like, you're making a statement like it's raining outside. Like, how is it considered to be an opinion? It's like, hey, it's raining. It's like saying, just so you know, you might need to get an umbrella or get some boots or something. It's like, hey, just letting you know, this is what it's like. It's just like, with that same logic, the bridge is out ahead. What the frick? What am I supposed to do about it? Go to your room. It's like, that's not my fault I crashed the bridge. I'm not that heavy.
Yeah. You know what also, I think what this phenomenon, the descriptions here, a lot of it is that you're coming up against cultural dysfunction. I really am at the point where I think that we have widespread cultural disease. And, Jeff commented about Danielle's statement. He relates to the critic versus complain distinction. And people who don't understand passion are the ones who don't feel it and constantly freak out over it in others. I really think that it's people that have something dysfunctional within them, like apathy. I really think that there is an epidemic of apathy, an epidemic of isolation, and then there's things related to that. And people that deal with those problems will pathologize people like us. I know I'm biased, whatever, that I think we're in a much more empowered and healthy and functional and an expansive state of being. Like, we're capable of taking on life and all of its insanity and difficulty, and passion is good. Apathy is really dysfunctional. Yeah. At best, it's a coping mechanism, or it's a symptom of deeper problems. It's not something that should be a goal in life. So, like when people react to you and say, you're angry, if I think of some of the instances I've had issues with people, and I'm taking my best guess, I really think that a lot of people, as part of our cultural disease, really want politeness. I've ranted about this before. Yes. They want people to be polite, and they don't. It's like they're pathologizing passion and bluntness and honesty. They're pathologizing honesty. They're pathologizing the value of truth. So if you share a fact and they think that you're too angry, they're just adding all of these warped pathological lenses that have nothing to do with what's actually happening. And it's so destructive. It's like it breeds more of the same problems. Like, imagine, if everybody's putting forward their apathetic part of themselves, and they're basically saying, I don't care about life, and I'm apathetic, then they're contributing more things and experiences and parts to life that don't matter. And so if everybody's contributing their apathetic side of themselves, then we all are surrounded by apathetic people, and we're surrounded by a society, or a community, that doesn't matter. And it's just a blob of strangers wandering aimlessly.
Yeah, well, if we were allowed to critique each other, as he said, if we were allowed to critique each other, and we're open to using critique as a way to discuss things and not feel automatically attacked and have to go into defense mode no matter what someone says, and be open to that, it could almost feel like really exhilarating to have a discussion with someone that's passionate, where you're not in danger, that they're not going to pull a gun and shoot you because you have, and you'd be like, yeah, this is so fun. You have the exact opposite point of view as me. Let's go. This is so cool. I'm learning so much right now. Like, I've never seen it from this point of view before. Keep going. Throw me another one. Throw me another. Tear me apart again. I gotta figure this out.
It's all about the challenge.
Would be fun. Don't you think that'd be fun? But people are like, no, don't critique me. I can't handle it. I'm going to totally defend myself. Don't ever do that. You're totally putting me down, and I'm going to go cry in my room right now.
Well, I think there's an attachment to a rigid worldview for a lot of people. Like, I've noticed it seems like when people spend too much time isolated and often online, that they tend to treat the actual world around them as if it's not real, as if everything is this interface that's online. And if it makes you care about people less. Like, it's just not the same as being in person. And if
Right.
people aren't getting that regularly, when they go in person, there's like this, it's almost like they're drunk and they don't want to go through the pain of the hangover. That's the metaphor I've used with isolation before. And I've met a lot of people that are constantly obsessing over their worldview and the things that they're stuck on, and it's extremely rigid, and it's getting increasingly more narrow. So they're touchy, and it's almost like they're sleep deprived and they're cranky, or I don't even know how to describe
Like they're
it.
zombies.
Well, it's this like perpetual intense annoyance. Like, it just infuriates them.
Like
when
you're Squidward constantly.
Sure, yeah, Squidward's a good one. Like, if Danielle is excited about, sharing ideas and exploring in that open curiosity, you're in a playful state. That's like the state of the healthy nervous system, if we're bringing it full circle.
Wait.
So when the people I'm talking about here, they're so rigid because they're so egoically and desperately attached to a certain view, and it's not just that they're demanding other people believe it. It's more of that, it's almost like this weird, extreme pet peeve. Like, just the idea of hearing someone describe their own perspective that doesn't fit the other worldview is socially awkward. It's like this, I can't even quite describe it. It's like a pet peeve. When somebody hears another person speak and thinks, you sound like an idiot, or I can't believe you sound that way. It's like this complete and deep intolerance.
Can I talk about Sia for a second, just real quick?
Okay, yeah, because
Can you hold it?
Yes.
Because I really want to get into this. I don't know how much time we have. Because
We've got time.
okay,
We got all
you
the
go
time in the
first, and
world.
I'll hold on to my
Okay.
Sia comment.
Yeah, I was about to say, this reminds me a lot about, like, SpongeBob and Squidward. Like, there's a huge difference. Like, SpongeBob is a really passionate guy. He freaking loves
I'm ugly
fried-
and I'm proud.
Yes. I'm ugly and I'm proud! Is that what he calls it? Like, there's a huge difference between the two. Like, SpongeBob is super passionate about the world around him, and he's, like, excited to do fry cooking or even simple things. Like, he's just easily happy about things around him. Then Squidward's just so angry, and he's trying to attach to a dream that he's not really good at. It's kind of a symbol. I kind of realized that they're both symbols of passion versus apathy in the world and how we see it today. It's like, I'm a SpongeBob when it comes to nursing, and some people are like Squidwards when it comes to it. I don't know, like, maybe I'm just kind of extrapolating a little too far, but it is kind of a good way of visualizing, as I've said, like, passion versus apathy in the world. It's
perfect.
from a kid's show. Like, it's a great analogy.
It fits perfectly, and like, Squidward's the butt of the joke. He's the one that's out of the loop, and the people I've met that are fulfilling that persona like to act as if they're in the cool club, or they're part of the right side of history, or however they want to characterize it. But I don't think they realize that being so serious all the time and so rigid actually makes them look absurd, or makes them really unpleasant to be around.
Yeah, like that episode where, Squidward's really passionate about music, and that episode where they went to, I forgot it was, but it was like a football game, and like, SpongeBob saw his passion about music and carried it out from his enthusiastic energy. And when Squidward went with all of these people from Bikini Bottom to perform at this Super Bowl event, he was just into it. He was freaking alive at that moment. Everybody was within it. That is passion.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the name of that song. I almost had
Sweet
it.
Victory.
Yes. Oh my God, that was amazing. That's one of the best
That
SpongeBob
sounds.
episodes.
I haven't seen that episode. I haven't watched SpongeBob for a long time, but it sounds like there's a connection happening, though. And what you were talking about, what happens in isolation, is the opposite. And I think this is what I'm feeling, is like, people need to talk to each other's faces instead of talking about things that are happening that are not present, because this is like the whole gossip media thing I was talking about. And Sia actually spoke during the trauma series because she has Ehlers-Danlos, is that how you say?
Ehlers-Danlos.
It's very painful, right? It's a very painful, and she's also has PTSD and a lot of stuff that happened in her life, but she's a Hollywood figure, so like nobody cares. They're like, oh well, but you have so much clout now, and you're so famous, so deal with it. Like, they don't give any wherever you are now is like, anyway. So I had mentioned something about Sia, and I got a whole bunch of pushback from friends of mine who are like, how can you even listen to that woman, because of her movie, you know, she totally disgraced the entire community, autistic community, and she hasn't apologized publicly, and just throwing all this stuff. And they hadn't even listened to her speak. Like, I just wrote a little thing that she spoke. They didn't listen to her back and forth with Gabor Mate. They had no idea if she talked about it or not, and they were just like, I'm not even giving 2 seconds of my time to a woman who hurt this community. And I'm like, it is so easy to do that, whether they're famous or it's your neighbor, to start pulling up all this stuff. Why don't you go and talk to her? Why don't you go onto her thing, find a way to communicate and say, you know, the autistic community would really appreciate that you address this, you know, and talk to her instead of building up this entire thing. And also it just bothers me that celebrities are not allowed to make mistakes. They're just not allowed to make mistakes. I know so many. I love movies. I love film directors, and there's a pretty famous film director that was banned from Cannes because he accidentally said something that related to Nazism, and they accused him of being a Nazi, and he can't go to Cannes for 5 years, and all of these things. And this is a man who does not even like to speak in public, and he had said this thing because he was nervous. It came out wrong, and now, you know, and then he's banned, right? It's just people, you know, it's noise. It really drives me crazy that people expect so much of people that are famous, that are, you know, movie directors or singers or anyone. They're under so much pressure to always say the right thing, always do the right thing, and they make one mistake, and then people. What she did say during her talk with Gabor is that she can't watch social media anymore. She tried to read it and take it, but it was too heavy for her. She can't read it anymore. Yep. So, if I were in her shoes, and I have been, because I do stuff on stage, I am a musician, I have to talk to people, and I say stupid things all the time, and I probably offended people today somehow. I probably offended someone. I'm sorry already, because everything you say can be
apologies.
taken. But what I'm saying is everything you can say can be taken offensively by someone in some community.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yep.
And so if you're always walking on eggshells, you never feel comfortable saying what you think, because you're going to, you know, maybe she made a huge mistake. Maybe she could have done it differently. But it's out there, and you hating her isn't going to erase the mistake. All she can do is address it. So tell her to address it.
Exactly.
You know,
Well,
to her.
What happened with her, though, is also honestly very subjective. They were criticizing the film she made that featured an autistic character, and they were stating that it was very poorly written. But it wasn't just that. They were turning it into this, like, caricature where it's this egregious crime against autistic people in the autistic community, and it was just really extreme when, you know, it doesn't occur to people that there's an incredible amount of nuance in this, and that in picking apart a film, you know, a work of art, a story, that it's subjective and there's layers to it. Also, Jeff is on the autistic spectrum. He says, I left the autism community over that, quote, controversy. I kept Twitter fighting with everyone over it. She's an artist and not accountable to the autistic community. No one can own autism. It's too individualistic to try to police like they would. And yeah.
Well,
yeah, like I like to.
Go ahead.
I was about to say, like, I like to call that stuff noise. It's like over-focusing on one thing and just blowing it out of proportion. Like, I see this with people who try to cancel others, or people who say, like, this is bad, like, this is gonna disturb the youth. Like, it's just a big bunch of noise. It's about, like, trying to shut people down before they have a chance to even say their piece. Also, like, we're putting stars to a really high standard. Like, they're not supposed to be perfect. Like, they're human at the end of the day, too. Even if they make millions of dollars more than we are. Like, can we just actually treat them as human beings for, like, a long-ass time? Or just even for an hour?
Mm-hmm.
So we can just stop being so harsh on them. I mean, yeah, people make mistakes, but they can also learn from them. They can become better through them. Allow that process of growth and evolution. They are allowed to.
Yeah, and artists have different ways of communicating. The director I was speaking of is Lars von Trier, And his movies to me speak to the psychology of women like no other movies I've ever seen. Like, I don't even understand how he understands women, my experience of being a woman so well. Like, how does he do this? But, you know, I'm not going to completely cancel an entire artist's work because he accidentally says something that makes him sound like a Nazi. I mean, you know, and the thing is he already said he hates public speaking, so he gets nervous. He says things come out backwards, like he doesn't even like talking about his movies to other people. So you have to realize that people have different ways of communicating. He makes movies because that's the way he understands the world, and then he has to talk about them with people. I've made things I couldn't explain. I couldn't even explain where they came from, and so. There's the whole part of being an artist too. If you think about Sia too, and the way she expresses herself, maybe through her music, and here she's trying a new medium, which is making a movie, which is not music, and she's, you know, she's learning like everyone else. I just want to read one quote, so I have time, and this is something that Gabor said. Our task, this is Gabor Mate says this. Our task is how do we make the world safe enough for one another to be ourselves. How do we do that? And we were talking about the Agora. We were talking about letting people make mistakes, even if they're in the public, especially if they're in the public eye. Imagine how much pressure those people are under to always say the right thing, to always apologize if they felt like they were supporting this community, but in doing that, then they accidentally were, you know, diss this other community because they happen to be opposed to each other, and they didn't even think of that, because they can't see everything that's happening. They're not God. And they're expected to keep track of all these points of view and make sure that, you know, I mean, oh, wow. I mean, if we're all doing that, no wonder we're so stressed.
That's why I consider myself a post-canceled person, because it's like the land that's acceptable. Everyone's standing on the land that's considered the acceptable arena, the acceptable stage. And the cultural disease that we're talking about here that is driven by this obsessive focus on the water is crawling into the land, and it's getting smaller and smaller until it's such a tiny island, and we're all crammed in together. And I'm just like, forget this. Most of what's around us is ocean. I'm just gonna be in the ocean. I'll only get wet once, and I'll stay that way. I am post-canceled.
I'm gonna be a crab.
Yeah, I'll hang out with the fish. Yeah, forget. I've never cared about trying to be presentable based on arbitrary and ridiculous rules and pressures. I feel
to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me a place where we could be safe to be ourselves. That is that is actually a safe space that I will advocate for. Safe spaces are meant for people to express themselves freely and to be basically safe from threats or if they're in danger. It's not meant to be in a place where you're not going to be subjugated to any criticism, or you're just going to be
suffocated.
Yes, it's meant for freedom of expression.
Meant to be open. Yeah. Well, if you think of how you create safety, safety is not something that should be obsessed over. I think that the way to do safety is minimalistically. That it's really just this bare minimum, this foundation. And so rather than building yourself this titanium prison, that's the safe space that everybody is talking about these days, where everyone's just trapped and miserable and suffocating and can't really express themselves or be as they are or do anything creative or take any risks. I would rather see safety be minimalistic, where we go as far as we can to the edge of risk. I'm very much a risk-taking person, and I go to the edge. And a lot of times other people think that I go too far or that's a little too crazy, and I'm like, if I'm the part of the niche extreme outlier that goes to that edge of risk, then you shouldn't want me to hold back too much, because I'm already on the edge of the standard deviation. So it would be a really dysfunctional society if we're all so focused on always being as safe as possible. That's very extreme to me.
Yeah, that's perfection. You're trying to be a perfect person, and
it's also this worship of safety that assumes that that should be your standard for everything, everywhere. Whereas I really think of it as, you want to build a foundation for yourself, and it's not just looking at safety. That's a very tiny piece of life, is to focus on that little thing when it's necessary. But most of a foundation, if you ask me, is built in a way that allows for openness, like the complete opposite of focusing on safety that's tends to lead people to be controlling and authoritarian. Like, if you're building a good foundation for people to interact and it creates a third space or an agora that sparks that magic of independent, autonomous, passionate interaction, that everyone is self-directed and intrinsically motivated, so the fire within of each person is really ignited. It's like you light that spark. That's a chemical reaction. And if you want that to be able to happen, you have to build the environment so that it is open and it's inviting and it brings people in and it sparks that curiosity so that they start to be self-reflective and self-directed.
And it's trust. It involves trust. I watched a Disney movie called Raya and the Last Dragon, and I just started crying because the whole theme of that movie, I'm not too into Disney, like Disney princesses, the whole thing, but this movie was really done because the theme was about trust. And what you need for that space is trust. And the reason I was crying in this movie is because I'm a preschool teacher, and I realized with the theme of this movie is that we do not trust. We do not give trust to the children in our classroom. We do not give them trust. Do an experiment if you have a child, or if you know a child, a niece, nephew, any kids in your life. Do an experiment. If that kid is a brat, trust them. Just trust them for a week. Give them the benefit of the doubt every day, 24/7 for a week. And I want you to watch the difference in how that child reacts to it. It relates to you.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Try it. Just try it. Because I work in a classroom with preschool teachers, okay? I do not see them trusting the children. I constantly see them assuming the worst. You see two children fighting. They're always assuming they know which one started it. Always. And why. They're making all of these assumptions based on what they know of that child. They do not give that child a blank slate. That child walks in the classroom. If you give that child a blank slate and you look at them and you're like, you can do anything you want today. You have no idea. I don't even know you. Like, I can't remember what you did yesterday. And you give them that blank slate and you trust them, you're going to see a whole new child because they're going to feel that. Yes. They are going to feel that responsibility that you're giving them to be the best that they can be. And if you look at them in that way, they can feel it. They can feel it. And we don't give children that ever. We're always assuming the worst, and we never give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, like Danielle and I feel they're like very similar to each other. Like, we have somebody that we're like caring for, and somebody who might mistakenly be seen as like below us. Like, a huge thing about that trust. I try to place as much trust in my patients as I can. I mean, yeah, I do trust my patients. Like, I don't think they're just going to be, like, calling out for me for dumb reasons. Like, I mean, even then, like, I'm still here to listen to them. They're the reason I have my job. I'm going to trust them. I'm going to see, like, what they're going with. Even if they might seem as, like, seeking, like, something is going on. They're calling out for me for a reason, and they want to, they just want me to be with them.
Can I ask you something? This is very controversial, by the way.
Good. We need it.
This is controversial because this is something I've always believed for over 20 years, but it's just coming out with this new understanding of trauma and mental illness. Basically, okay, this is what Gabor says, and this is very controversial. This is what my mom will not accept, and many people of that generation, and that is fine. Okay, he says there are very few diseases, and there are no mental illnesses that are genetic. There are absolutely none. But certainly with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there are a few genes involved. But with most medical conditions, there are no genes involved. But there are genes for sensitivities. But basically what he's saying is that even the schizophrenic you were talking about, it is not genetic. It is not something that is so wired in her brain that she cannot heal. This is what I'm saying. Because 20 years ago, when they were going to put me in the state hospital for the rest of my life, they were saying, you have this gene, you have this thing, and no matter what you do for the rest of your life, unless you take this drug or this drug to medicate it, including schizophrenics, they often have to do this. Yeah. It is never going to change. You cannot rewire your brain. You cannot. They used to believe, and we were talking about this before we were online, when I did my training in childhood development, we learned that at age 24, your brain stops developing. Now this has changed. This is not the part that's that people aren't going to agree with, because now we know that we can rewire our brains. We can make new neural pathways work after the age of 24. Like, your pre-programming is not set when you turn 24, and like there's nothing more you can do. But they used to believe this. This was like 10 years ago I did my training.
Wow.
So this is not that long ago, okay? And now they're starting to see things differently. But do you believe that these people that you work with, if they were given the proper conditions, maybe they could go do a training at ayahuasca or whatever, or use a psychedelic or whatever way, that they could heal from their mental health condition? In other words, it is a gene that maybe they can be triggered. He's not saying that epigenetics, that trauma cannot be passed down. He did not say that trauma cannot be passed down through intergenerationally. I want to be very clear about that, because someone misunderstood me when I wrote my post. He does believe that trauma can be passed down through generations. He's not saying that. He's talking about mental health conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety. My mother considers alcoholism also a mental health condition, in the terms that she calls it a disease. So in her mind, alcoholism she will have for the rest of her life. It will never go away because it's a gene, and there's nothing she can work through underneath the alcoholism that's a trauma that can be healed, so that she could drink again and not have a problem.
Right. I also wanted to add to that too, like, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm a medical professional myself, but it kind of makes sense. Like you were saying, like the sensitivity to genes, like, that makes sense. I mean, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get it, but you might be...
It can be triggered.
Yeah. You might be a little bit more likely to get it, but especially it is especially triggered by trauma. Like, borderline personality disorder, no genetics behind that one. Like, I'm going to keep looking into your theory, but that is primarily caused by trauma.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean...
I'm someone in my family who has that, and I know why she has her trauma.
Yes.
And what she needs to work through if she could, and I know she can be healed 100%.
Yeah, and all too often we just, like, dismiss these people because they have a tendency to act out in very extreme ways because they're afraid of people abandoning them. Like, that shit's probably from trauma, man. It actually is from trauma. Like, it's so easy to tell them, say, like, if you keep acting like this, like, people are going to run away from you, but that's not going to make their trauma go away and disappear. Like, you got to listen to that shit, man.
Yeah. And that's what the 3 or 4 of the speakers that were in this conference, too, were people, I mean, who had such extreme trauma in their childhood. That's why they had these addictions in their life to cover up. We didn't talk about this online. We weren't online yet. They were either alcohol or cocaine or whatever drug they could find on the streets to cover up that trauma. Okay? So I think it works the same with the medical, the psychiatric community also, is they're also using the drugs to help the people while they're in the safe place. I'm not saying they don't need the safe place, because some people do. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have psychiatric hospitals. What I'm saying is that should be for a limited time while they're working on what has happened in their childhood. Some people believe this is like prenatal, like pre-conception, that there's things that happen when we're talking about epigenetics. Like, that in psychiatry, this man that I was talking about, Stanislav Grof, talks about this, how it was Freud who said, nothing in our lives, we are not affected by anything that ever happened before birth. Not even like in the womb. Like, only things we are affected by in our life are after we are born.
Absolutely.
And so their psychiatry is still based on this thing. It's like anything that happened to your mother during the womb or before that, or before, like, in her or generations past, is not going to affect you genetically. This is still very prevalent, because this is 20 years ago. This is what they believed. Only now we're starting to understand about even epigenetics. But I just really feel like I have hope. I'm an idealist, and I really do have hope that those people, every person that you work with in that hospital, should have a chance to go through whatever, holotropic state to work through that trauma, and that I 100% believe that they can be healed. And there's millions of different ways that people can be healed.
Yeah. I work
Just
at...
endless amount.
I do work at, like, a hybrid between, like, a group home and a nursing home, so it's not really a hospital we work at, but still applicable there, because, like, each resident is there, they're kind of staying in their own rooms most of the time, and I really don't blame them. Like, sometimes they might feel depressed or anxious because they're alone in the room constantly. Like, one patient I have is usually in his room, he's usually alone, and that just might be a way of coping with what he has. sometimes I'll just like to talk to him, and he can't speak, so I have to sometimes try to lip read, which I'm not really good at, so found a whiteboard that I was going to throw away, and that helped a lot. So I just like, so just spending time with them also just means a lot too, and that helps to reduce, like, helps with the symptoms and helps to cope with things as well. I mean, like, just offering presents means a lot to people. It's not a fix, but it sure helps.
Yeah, well, sometimes it has a really powerful effect that really helps in ways that people don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting close to our end time here. This was such an incredible conversation that I didn't necessarily do our usual call out to invite anybody to join us if they want. Although this conversation was so wild, I guess I just kind of, it was good to let it go where it needed to.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody is watching us right now and has any other questions or comments, maybe we can do our last couple of minutes with that. I'm not seeing anything new right now, but maybe we'll get something. And Jeff, I'm not surprised, even though Jeff wasn't really on the show tonight, he was in the comments, and I'm not surprised at all that Jeff and Danielle connected and see eye to eye on a lot of things. I need to make sure you two interact again. And I'm really glad that Dylan kind of spontaneously showed up. We weren't even at all expecting you to be on the show with us, and tonight's conversation was a wacky conversation.
Yeah. And if you're still listening, Stanislav, that was the name of the Goff. Stanislav. I knew he was a Russian psychiatrist, but he really cuts down psychiatry, and he was a psychiatrist for a very long time. But when he started understanding, like, the things that mystics went through, and saints and all of centuries and centuries of shamans, what they do is, he had a couple jokes about that. I mean, like, modern Western scientists say, I don't know who was a schizophrenic, and Joan of Arc was, they're all diagnosing all of these people with all of these modern day mental health conditions.
So, like, you got this, but we can't give you any Lexapro now.
Buddhist monks are, in a dissociative state. Come on, I mean, literally, they have a name for everything. It's just, it's hilarious.
Well, you'll notice that in this, I think a lot of the medical system in psychiatry comes off as very in the mind, which is funny because so many of actual dysfunctions are caused by being in the mind too much and being disconnected from the body, which is literally the definition of dissociation. So if they're constantly in that space and trying to label and interpret everything, and then every time they label some new condition or disorder, it automatically has to be pathologized. Yeah. And yet at the same time completely miss all of the actual issues. Like, how many times have I gone into systems where they treat whatever condition I actually have as something that's not real because they want to think of it as a mental illness, when actually it's very physical. I'm like, do you understand what non-seizure convulsions are? I'm flopping around like a Muppet, I can't stop it, and you're calling it mental.
Yeah, that is very physical of your body. And like I was telling you, that is your body working through something that is ready to work through. And you need to be in a safe space to do that. It was like someone having an epileptic seizure. You're going to move the first thing you do is move everything out of the way so they don't hurt themselves.
And don't restrain them.
You're not going to be like, I'm sorry, this must be all in your head right now. I mean, you wouldn't do that with someone with epilepsy, and that's probably what it looked like when you were having your seizure. You wouldn't be like, oh, I'm sorry, it's all in your head right now. Deal with it. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's a mental illness, epilepsy? I'm sorry, I disagree.
Yeah, it's like if somebody's bleeding out and you just say, like, it's all in your head, that's just pretty much like saying, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, it's really insane. I mean, I have plenty of motivations to really spend as little time in the medical system as possible. Although what I really wanted to do is one of the projects that I haven't gotten to yet is make a trauma care pamphlet, so that I can start giving it out to hospitals, medical centers, etc., and just tons of places where people could use it, because I've really found that the basic language with trauma and being aware of it has really become very popular in the last 20 years, but the understanding of it is not there. And the people that some of the people I've met that talk about it a lot are more interested in butchering the concepts and using it to make themselves look more like victims than to legitimately have like authentic motivations. Their motivations are often ulterior for manipulating things, and then there's still people that want to treat it as mental illness. So it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
trauma
like, I
isn't
would-
something that. This is something I learned from Gabor too, which is a really good language to understand. Is trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is how your body is reacting to what happened to you. So it's taking the whole blame and victim thing off of what happened to you and just accepting this is how your body is reacting. And with PTSD, anything can trigger it, right? I mean, not anything, but the things that are related to it are going to trigger it. But it's your body's response. It's the same as like when someone is laughing, I'm going to laugh. That's my body's response. I'm hearing someone tell a joke. My body's response is I'm going to laugh because I think it's funny. It's still a body reaction. It shouldn't be stigmatized as this whole thing as,
Right.
I can't ever trust you because you're going to go off on everything because you had a horrible childhood. So these people are like, I don't want to talk about the fact that I've seen these things and I've gone into holotropic states because people are going to, stigmatize me and treat me as a freak the rest of my life. So I'm just not going to talk about it. We should be free to talk about these things. I met a man in a coffee shop. We were just sitting talking about a book, and he said, yeah, I had this really weird thing happen to me once, but I'm never going to tell anyone because they'd call me crazy for the rest of my life. This is very common. I think there's I'm assuming there are a lot of people that would never talk about the strange things they've seen. And this is outside of just dreaming. I'm like, while they were awake, seeing things that they shouldn't see. And never, like I know a person who said that he saw a ghost and he would never tell anyone because he swears to God he saw a ghost right in front of him, and would never tell anyone because it's stigmatized in the society. It's just really sad.
Right. Like I also wanted to add, like, with those trauma pamphlets that like you're making in like this conversation right now, I would love to share this in like my whatever workplace I have, because like it's gonna completely change the way we work with patients and make their outcomes way better. Like, I'm all about quality improvement and like improving the work that I have, but holy shit, like this is actually going to make our work a lot better, and it's like going to it's going to help the patients realize that we give a shit about you and you're going to be taken seriously. You're not going to just be like pushed aside.
Yeah.
Well, if MAPS is going into the VA, why can't they start going into the psychiatric hospitals?
Yeah.
Right?
Or even like group homes, regular homes, hospitals.
Yeah.
I mean,
all over.
I hope to get to a different hospital that's in the cities. Got my interview last week. I'm really hoping I get in.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna have us wrap it up here, and not terribly abruptly, but I wanted to invite both of you, whoever wants to go first, maybe you can play rock paper scissors. If there's something that inspired you in this conversation that you really is kind of stuck with you and you really want to share that, maybe because it seems like all of us have gotten into a real idea space that just the creativity and the playfulness and openness is really flying. So I want you each to have a opportunity to share something before I end the show.
Okay, whose birthday was closest to today? When's your birthday, Dame?
February 21st.
Mine's the 10th, so she beat me.
October 6th. Oh, fuck, I don't know how to calculate this.
Okay, Dylan, why don't you go? Do you feel like you've got something
We're about even. You're 4 months ahead, I'm 4 months back, so
Okay,
it's up to you. I'll let you go first. You can go first.
All right. I was about to say, as I said before, just with like the training and stuff like that, training to like help people to cope with trauma, just offering presents and just listening to them, like that stuff right there. I want that to spread. It's like I just hope that I can let patients know that they're gonna be taken seriously and heard. Like, I mean, if we start working on their trauma too, and it helps them to like open that stuff up, their health is gonna get a lot better too. Like, just embracing the fact that they're human, and also embracing that we all go through shit, man. But to pretend like it's not there isn't gonna help anything. It's just gonna stink up the room even more. But it helps us to take on that, or at least take it on at an angle that's the most comfortable to them, and maybe they might eventually go down that chain. It's up to them, but I would love to use this as a part of my career to work with my patients better, and so they're heard, taken seriously, like I said a lot of times. But it's a big thing that I want to do, is be a patient advocate.
Yeah. I want to bring in, since you and Jeff are both talking about something similar, and I wanted to be able to respond to him too. So I'm going to read what he said, and I want my last thing to be a response to him. He says, a pamphlet is not going to help them operationalize the information. They already go to the trainings, but no one teaches them how to implement any of it on the floor with actual clients. I've sat in the same trainings, and I've seen this over and over and over. Trauma-informed care, it's called, and it may even be federally required by now. They train, check a box, and carry on as usual. A lot of what he's describing and the jadedness of how ineffective it is very similar to a lot of my experiences in workplaces and volunteer settings. So when I reference that some of the basic language has become very popular and centrally focused in the last 20 years, yet the understanding is not there, him and I are both referencing that. Now, you might wonder, why would I want to create a pamphlet as my way of responding to this? And part of what motivated me to get to that place is that I want to start with something small and accessible and try to expand and build upon it.
Yes.
And it's a reaction and a response to noticing just how incredibly resistant most of the medical professionals and staff were in anything I tried to offer them. You know, how many doctors and places I went to try to get help that completely rejected it and ignored it, barely talked to me for 5 or 10 minutes, and then tried to shuffle me off to a psychiatrist to get antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, or a combination, when I've had none of those conditions. So like their resistance and their ignorance and their apathy and honestly arrogance is this incredible barrier. And so I never want to change people's minds. I never really want to try and convince or influence people, because it's a weakness of mine, just with the nature of how I am, how the world is around me. It is what it is. And so exposure is step 1 through 20 for me. So with those pamphlets, I can expose people to something that is bite-sized, that's accessible, it's there, and for the people who are wise enough and open enough, like you and others like yourself, that would actually take it on, then that's going to slowly start to open up a gateway for us to do real work.
Yeah.
It's just my hope, at least.
Yeah, I mean, also it depends on like how people are motivated. Like if they're just gonna just slide on through it, like they're not gonna really take it in and just be like, oh, it's a required training, blah blah blah. Unless if somebody is passionate about improving the quality of what they do and always seeking out ways of doing things better. It depends on like what that person is on, or like where they're approaching things. So I guess it's just the apathy versus the passion.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a final idea for that. Those trainings. This is actually what we do in preschool. It's called role playing. And when I was talking about teaching the children to, if they see another friend crying, to bring them a tissue, we don't just tell them. We actually make a little scenario and we say, okay, you're going to play the child that's crying, and they have to pretend that they're crying. Okay. And you're going to practice. Who wants to practice first? And then they raise their hand. And then they go and then they go and they get the tissue and they practice. And this isn't real. This is like, we're practicing for when this happens. So there's no like a shame. Like, you're not going to do it while a kid is crying and like make a big ruckus and he doesn't want anyone to know. You're practicing this for when it happens. So why don't you do that? Why don't they do that in their trainings? And role playing, when you're the role of the person that's in the situation where they need help, and you're like having someone role play that with you, this is what you do, you're going to feel that, and you're going to be like, whoa, that's what that feels like, you know? And I think that's something that lacks in this world, is people in real life situations practicing for real life situations. That's what we should, that's how we teach children, and I think that's the way a training session should be.
Also want to add, like, it gives kids like some sort of power. It shows like you can influence this person in that way. Like, you are capable of helping people. Like, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still do these things. Like, you can have this impact on this person just by being there with them. It shows them that, hey, you're much more, like, you have a lot more power than you thought you did. You're not just like some sort of kid running around. You can do this just by giving them a tissue. It's a very simple thing to do.
Yeah, but we do that with all the skills, and I think adults can learn that way too. Like, absolutely. Literally, let's just role play this. What would you do if? And you be that person who needs this, and you be the person. Let's practice. It's practice, and it's practical, and you feel the feelings. Maybe it's like you go to a movie and you feel the characters vicariously. it works, right? Like, have you ever cried in a movie because you were like totally like that character? Well, do that in a room for your job, and you're learning the skill, and you're going to be that character. You're going to feel it a whole different way when you're the person that needs the help in the group home, and you're sitting in your room all by yourself, and you're waiting for someone to notice. Like, oh, let's role play what we could do for this person. Let's see, let's brainstorm. I don't know. It just seems like it's a great way to teach staff anything. Police, the police force. Oh, MAPS also is trained a policeman to use psychedelics too, to help.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's so on board that this is real. I recently, a week ago, they've just started this. So, I mean, it's just first responders and everyone who's dealing with their own trauma. There's a million ways this can go. You just get one person on board, and it'll just, that made me really happy when I heard that.
Yeah, why defund the police when you can just send them to outer space?
Yeah, it's like, don't fuck the police, fuck up the police.
Jeff mentioned something when Danielle was talking about the training idea, and he says, let's do a workshop and create one. He just said something else. Remind me to tell
There
you
are a
the
lot of
tissue story.
actors that are out of work. I can just tell you, we can get a whole acting troupe on this.
Yes.
They would love to do this. That's what they're trained to do.
Jack and I met in drama club.
Uh-oh. It's really coming back full circle, like, what,
I was in
13 years ago?
Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So
Okay.
Jeff is really. I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up. And Jeff says, "Hey, let's start a work group and create." He's been talking about trainings for different. As part of it, he's been talking about trainings as alternatives to social justice-based trainings, because there's so many social justice proponents that are inserting a lot of these trainings that are really just like bludgeoning people with their ideology. And so we ended up with having some conversations that were casual, but people were saying that they felt they learned so much more than in some of their professional trainings. And in this conversation, we're coming back around to it. So I think there's a real opportunity. And just the fact that another factor of this, our friend Neil, shout out to Neil, and just some of the people that we're connected to internationally, like Neil's in the UK, there's a growing group of therapists and psychology practitioners that are critical of a lot of the social justice as being clearly signifying a lot of dysfunctional mental health and traumatic issues. So it's not a healthy, functional ideology. And so there's all of these people coming together, and we're seeing a theme where there is a real need and potential to offer workshops, or not even just trainings, but like sessions where people can grapple with a lot of what we've talked about tonight in a way that's not ideological. It's more open and honest, and it's not going to be hijacked by something dysfunctional.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on this in the book called Reinventing Organizations. It's about teal organizations, which is a whole new way to work in any business or organization. And the key to that is creating spaces like this, and it's creating trust. So you're at your annual meeting, and it's all about creating scenarios and like that create trust, and it's back to trust again, and it's back to that safe place again. Because once you have that safe place in your work, whatever your work environment is, I wish that teachers could have it too, because we are really isolated in our own little classrooms doing our own little thing, and nobody wants to admit that they make mistakes and they need help. And I needed help. I ask my teachers all the time, what do I do? What do I do? I do, but and I think in every workplace it's that, like, I don't want to reveal that I don't know what to do, and I'm not going to open up about this. But if you're that's why we do it with kids when we do these lessons. We don't do it when it's happening, because then the child's gonna be like, why are you picking on me? Just because I did that. You do it as before. It's like preventative. It's like, I'm not picking, this didn't happen yet. When it does happen, you'll know what to do. No one feels like they're targeted. And that's the thing about kids, is they're always being targeted in the classroom at times when it's not appropriate for them to be targeted. And that creates shame culture, and that destroys trust immediately.
Yes.
And so all of these things are like scenarios. They're called grace and courtesy lessons. It's just, we're going to create this scenario, and next time you'll know what to do. There's no blame. There's no shame. There's no you did it wrong. There's like, if this happens, and kids love it. When they see it happen, they're so excited that they saw the kid crying first, and you have 15 children running with Kleenex.
Would you like a box?
You have to buy like 25 boxes of Kleenex when you do this lesson. I'm just saying, because it goes real fast.
Yes, I mean.
But I think it can work with adults. What do you think? You can work with adults.
Like empathy is another big thing that comes into play as well, because I know what it's like to feel like I'm not being heard by a doctor. I mean, I had to save my life, and I had to save myself from my gallbladder, my appendix killing me. That was an interesting story. So, I don't want them to go through something like that. I think that's another great step. I think that's another great idea to do it, like role play, and if you have a patient in role play, if there's like a patient in crisis, or like how do we handle them, instead of saying like, I'll just give you some lorazepam, we'll hope that works. Like, no, just like use holistic attempts. It's like you can use your presence, you can use your words, like you can use touch if they allow it you to. Like that shit works still. Like, be creative.
Yeah.
Use what you can.
You wouldn't believe this
Yeah.
goes really deep, guys. I know you haven't touched this. I just read a book about this, but like literally stories about people who are like anti-Semitic that realize they're actually Jewish. Like, because I know I seem to make a huge jump up, but I've been making this little line of connection the whole way, is because once you realize that it's you and your role, and it's real, and you're role playing it, it opens up whole new worlds. So I'm just saying, role playing is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, it kind of also reminds me of this video where there was a white supremacist, and they did a DNA test, and they found out he's like 10% black. The look on his face.
Yeah, no, but that's transformative, because once you realize that this could be me, or this is me, or this could be my child, this is, that is going through this, like once you put yourself in those shoes, it's completely transformative.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah.
Amen, guys. I don't know, Father, Son, and the Holy Toast.
Yeah.
We've said our Hail Marys. It's the end of the show. I want to go party with Dylan at the meadery.
All right.
But
first.
Jeff and John, if you're out there, and anybody else who's watched and who's having the watch party in the back porch, I'm glad everybody was here. And if anybody watching or listening would like to contact us, it's jeffandnemo@gmail.com. Or you can catch us on the live stream, or comment, or find us on Discord. Thanks, everybody. Peace.
Yeah. Eat yourself, but peacefully.
Now, how do I stop live streaming? We'll be here forever.
Yeah.
No.
I love how I have these little Pippi Longstocking